welcome everybody. Thank you very much. This is the first of the sessions from the Southern Region. Just by way of introduction, my name's Jo Bell and I chair the South Region of IWFM, and we're delighted to have you join us today for what looks like being a great presentation from Super Wellness. Can you flick the next ones on? For today's event, there is CPD recognition, and the numbers there 5340-894. So you can use that to record this as CPD because it is a very current topic. Next one. Just wanted to let you know some of the other training courses that are coming up on IWFM. All these are available on our website, and you know, you're very welcome to join them. And finally, you just saw there that the entries for the Impact Awards are open, but the deadline is the 24th of April, so we don't have much time for that. So just before I hand over to Elliot to take us through this, I just wanted to extend the offer to join the IWFM mentoring program. That it's new, so it's a really key part of senior managers' roles to support other members. So again, you can get details of this on the website. And if you'd like to become more actively involved, we would love to hear from you in the South Region. We're looking for some committee members to help share the workloads, so do reach out after on that as well. So on that note, I'll hand over to Elliot for what looks like a very interesting talk this lunchtime. Thank you, Elliot.
Thank you very much, Jo, and thank you very much everyone for having me today. Welcome to today's session on workplace wellbeing with impact. Going to be, as was just under an hour, hopefully depending on interactions during the session, we might have time for questions at the end. But of course, if you would like to ask anything during the session, just pop it in the chat or raise your hand, that's absolutely fine. A couple of bits of housekeeping just to start. If you wouldn't mind muting yourself when you're not going to be speaking, that would be absolutely great. You can do that by looking at the bottom left-hand side of your screen and clicking mute. That just means that I'm not getting distracted if there's any background noise. That's absolutely great. Thank you very much. And of course, it's lovely to have cameras on. If you can, just helps me to kind of gather the mood of the online room, see if what I'm saying is hitting home a bit, and if not, I'll move on a bit quicker. But that's absolutely great. Of course, as I said, if you've got any questions, jump into the chat, raise your hand, and I'll jump in. If I've got Louise to help me if there's anything in the chat that I'll miss. So let's get started. So welcome everyone, I'm Elliot Foster. I'm the Workplace Wellbeing Strategy Consultant at Super Wellness. I'm also an organisational psychologist. I've got a master's degree with distinction in organisational psychology. What that means is that I focus on behaviour of employees in the workplace and apply psychological principles and research methods to improve the overall work environment. And that includes things like performance, communication, professional satisfaction, and of course, health and well-being. I'm also a mental health first aid instructor. You've probably heard of mental health first aid. I'm very passionate about workplace mental health as well. And one of my main passions in the workplace is really helping organizations make impactful and sustainable change to become healthier places to work, rather than tick box exercises, helping organizations think about how they can change the way that they work to prevent ill health in the first place, rather than getting to the point where you've got an increase of staff turnover or things like increased sickness, absence, etc. So a bit about Super Wellness before I jump into it. So Super Wellness, we were founded in 2011 and have worked with over 1,000 organisations since then. You can see a number of organisations on there. I think organisations like Vitality, Network Rail, Loughborough University, REM, and Real Estate Management Limited. And we have worked with quite a few facilities management organisations. As an organisation, we focus on prevention through lifestyle change, helping organisations helping individuals, change the way that they look at health and well-being through a lifestyle focus, but also helping organisations from a strategic point of view. We really do well at what we do. As you can see, a number of awards on there. So as I said, we're really good at what we do. We do things like programs, webinars, strategy support, training for leaders, managers, and champion support, etc. So getting into the crux of today. So we've got about 50 minutes to get through this. So we're going to be focusing on these key areas. So what is well-being and why does it matter? How have employee expectations changed in the last few years? Not going to be going to COVID too much, but obviously there's an impact there. And also why having a workplace well-being strategy is key. It'll be great to hear from you throughout. So as I said, just pop your thoughts if I ask any questions on in the chat, or just shout out. That'd be fab. So the first thing is, what is well-being? Does anyone want to give it a go and unmute themselves or tell me what they believe well-being is defined as? What do you think well-being is? Either shout out or pop it in the chat. I don't mind.
Elliot, I'd say part of it is getting the work-life balance in the correct kilter.
For sure, definitely. Thanks, Joe. Yeah, work-life balance, more and more important, especially now with an increase in hybrid working, for sure. People not knowing the difference between and knowing the right thing of how to shut off from their office in the home and kind of stopping going to work, etc. Anyone else got any thoughts on what well-being is?
Being the very best you can, both in health and mind.
Thanks, Ian. I really like that. That's being the best that you can be, for sure. And that's both in terms of health and mind. And I like that because you're not specifically focusing on work, and that is that wider holistic view of well-being. So thank you very much for that, Ian. So in terms of what the World Health Organization defines well-being as, it's a positive state that's experienced by individuals and societies. So importantly, it's a resource for daily life and determined by social, economic, and environmental conditions. Importantly, if you think about social, economic, and environmental conditions that you as an individual face, work impacts all of these. Social aspects, who are you meeting through work, economic, obviously money, etc., and environmental conditions. If you're at work, what kind of environment are you working in? Is it a physically safe one? Is it a mentally safe one? And also at home, is your working home working setup fruitful for higher well-being? Well-being encompasses quality life, as we've talked about there, and the ability of people and societies to contribute to the world with a sense of meaning and purpose. So importantly, well-being is not merely an absence of disease, but includes quality life and people having that sense of meaning and purpose, and that really extends to work. So why does well-being matter in the workplace? So first of all, as an organisation, you all have legal responsibilities and a duty of care to your staff. As such, all employers must provide their employees with a safe and stress-free place to work. If we think about historically, health and safety, there are a lot of legal things to make sure that you can do that, and they were stereotypically around that physical health and well-being, but there are actually legal responsibilities that organizations are required to do in terms of a stress point of view as well. And that involves a two-stage process of identifying any risks to which an employee may be exposed and taking appropriate measures to control these risks. You can do that kind of format there through what is called a stress risk assessment. And if you're interested in a bit more on that, you can go onto the Health and Safety Executives website, and they have a template there for a stress risk assessment that you can either roll out across your whole organization or teams, etc., depending on your need. Employers must do whatever is reasonably practical to achieve this protection and must carry out risk assessments, as I've said, to identify potential hazards at work. Depending on the size of your organization, these stress risk assessments don't always have to be written down, but as I've said, have a look at the health and safety executive and see what they say about your size of organisation. In terms of financial reasons why workplace wellbeing matters, I'm sure you've seen or have heard, there's a ream of academic literature and in practice that shows that healthier people are more productive, they're happier, and are off less from work. This also means that they're more likely to stay at your organisation. You're going to have a better retention, lower staff turnover. You're going to spend less on recruitment costs, trying to get people through the door and get them to stay. Alongside the financial benefits of staff being more productive, staff staying longer means that you have reduced recruitment costs, as I've said, and the CIPD state that the average cost of this recruitment is between £1,500 and £3,000, but this doesn't actually include lost productivity from that vacant post. So you can think about, by keeping those staff in place, you're saving that money already. You also become an employer of choice. An organisation that looks after their staff are easier to recruit high quality talent and easier to retain them. We've all heard that what Gen Z are looking for in terms of a workplace, and they want to be cared for, they want to be able to develop and learn, and they want their organisation, their employer, to really care about them as an individual. An employer of choice means that your company culture, your leadership styles, and employee engagement initiatives are desirable to potential candidates and current employees. There's also obviously moral and ethical obligations to ensure you are not causing harm to others and valuing every employee as an individual. Treating, for example, everyone like they were a friend or family member. But rather than looking at the benefits, let's look at the risks of not supporting the health and well-being of your staff. So, 1.8 million workers in the UK suffered from work-related ill health in 2022/2023. These stats are from the Health and Safety Executive, and stress, depression, or anxiety accounted for just under half of these, 49%. Musculoskeletal disorders, obviously stuff with your back, things in your legs, your muscles, muscle pain, etc. That's 27%. And across the UK, this costs businesses £13.1 billion. The cost of ill health is actually much higher than workforce injuries. If we think back to that stereotypical health and safety in things like workplace injuries in the workplace actually accounts for 7.7 billion. So if you look at what the difference is actually just under £6 billion more for work-related ill health, even though it is often traditional health and safety, as I mentioned, that gets prioritised. Absence levels are on average 7.8 days per employee per year, and that's actually 2 days more than pre-COVID levels. Over a quarter of organisations report an average absence level of 10 days or more. If we think about how employee expectations have changed since COVID, flexible working, hybrid working has become a lot more popular. So when we talk about flexible working, that describes a type of working arrangement which gives a degree of flexibility on how long, where, when, at what times employees working. Hybrid working is a form of flexible working where workers spend some of their time working remotely, usually but not necessarily from home, and some in your workspace. 2/5 of employees have seen an increase in formal requests for flexible working following the pandemic. And this brings with it its own challenges, making sure that we're still able to collaborate, still able to learn, and organizations and individuals are able to engage with each other. There's an increased onus on well-being from individuals. There was a worry after the first lockdown that it would impact well-being, and actually a 2021 study from the Health and Safety Executive did confirm this. So many organisations increased the provision available for employees to help. Employees are now expecting this to continue, and 71% of employees felt companies needed to have a greater role in their overall welfare, well-being and happiness. Priorities have changed since the pandemic, and there is a hugely increased expectation with support for individual health, so specifically around mental health, financial well-being, and increasingly more the menopause. There's also a higher expectation around equality, diversity, and inclusion support. For example, a huge increase in awareness and support around neurodiversity. Neurodivergent employees feel much less supported in the workplace compared to neurotypical employees, as you can see on the diagram on screen, both from their employer, their line manager, and their colleagues. They feel like they are supported much less. 30% of employees have carried out education and awareness raising about neurodiversity and common neurodivergent identities for all staff within the past 2 years, although just 19% of employees said they have reviewed formal people management policies to make them neuro-inclusive. So moving on to wellbeing strategy. Well, what is it? A wellbeing strategy is a plan of action that you as an employer creates to safeguard or improve the well-being of your employees. Typically, it exists concretely as a document outlining your goals, objectives, and rationale behind employee well-being, as well as the specific initiatives and actions that will actualize these. If you look at the reasoning for having a well-being strategy, I think we can all agree that never mind the subject, projects are much more successful if you have a plan ahead and look at the evidence. This is exactly the same for well-being in the workplace. If you look at the table on screen, the CIPD did a report in 2022. And if you look at the objectives that an organization was looking to hit, whether that's have a healthier, more inclusive culture, a better work-life balance, as Joe mentioned earlier, lower sickness absence, or improved productivity, you can see that they were much more likely to be achieved if you have a well-being strategy than if you don't. You can see that the differences in numbers there. So thinking about your well-being strategy, and you don't need to shout out or put in the chat where you are, but just have a think about where you and your organization are. You may know that your organization has a strategy, you may not, but as an employee, it's actually really key that you have an understanding of what it is, because as an organization, there's no point of them having the best strategy in the world if you as the employees don't understand where it is. Think about, is your organization, the early stages, just considering well-being? Maybe they do a couple of ad hoc campaigns. They've got a few initiatives in place. They might have a few mental health first aiders. They might have an employee assistance program. They might have a few initial well-being champions, for example, or they might do some things around awareness days, awareness weeks. What about the next stage? They're going a bit further than that. An organization, they're thinking about how do they improve engagement with it, but they're getting that webinar fatigue. They're running webinars around health and well-being, but people aren't turning up. They're struggling to get them on board. And how do we address those more fundamental challenges and getting line managers on board, for example? Or are we at number 4? You're starting to introduce your wellbeing strategy. You've got a wellbeing committee, you've got that senior leadership support, you've got that line manager support, and you've got that ongoing calendar of initiatives throughout the year so that your employees understand that it's not just a tick box exercise, that your organization actually cares about their health and well-being. Or maybe you're at the far end and you've got a very mature well-being strategy. You understand what you've been doing, what works, what doesn't, and you're continuously improving that. You've got your team leaders, your line managers trained to understand how to support their staff, how to make their work better from a job design point of view so that they are preventing health on the ground floor. They understand your objectives and you know how to measure the success of your well-being strategy and program. But obviously, well-being strategy, well-being is quite a difficult thing to define anyway, but what is a well-being strategy and what does it include? So first of all, think about a long-term direction. It'll really help you to think about getting started with your objectives. So think around what you want to achieve in the first quarter, year, then what about the second and third years? They can change. How will you measure the effectiveness of your strategy and your wellbeing program? So wellbeing, as I've said, is notoriously difficult to measure. How are you going to go about it? You can think creatively about this. Frameworks. What are you going to base your wellbeing program on? Make sure that it's evidence-based. There are so many. There's the HSE management standards. There's things like the ISO 45003, etc. Making sure that you're basing your program and strategy on a evidence-based framework to start with will give you a great start. What interventions will you include? Will they be mental health? Will it be physical health? Will it be financial well-being or social well-being? Is your strategy going to focus on support, so helping people once they're already ill, or is it a preventative one, making sure that you as an organization are supporting individuals to not get ill in the first place? As we know, that is much more both financially and morally beneficial to you as an organization. When will your activities be? How will you keep wellbeing fresh on the agenda but not overwhelming to avoid attention fatigue? We know that if we have awareness weeks and they come around every year, and if an employee just says that you're doing one mindfulness session during stress awareness week once a year, what they're seeing actually is that an organization, you're doing a tick box exercise, it's a PR stunt, PR exercise. You don't really care about my well-being if that's all that we're doing. And the team, who are you going to ask to support you? So as an organization, you may have a wellbeing lead, you may not, you might have the office manager that does that, you might have someone in HR. Looking after the well-being of the whole workforce is more than just one person's job. It's really helpful to have a team around them. So whether that's a committee, champions, other people from across the workforce, maybe having someone at the senior leadership level as a kind of a sponsor for it, making sure that it's getting into those key areas. And also, the really key point about a wellbeing strategy and program is that key communication. How are you going to communicate your strategy, your program, and making sure that it's impactful for your staff? So going into a bit more detail around those 6 areas. So thinking around the objectives. So how do you set objectives for your strategy, for your program? The initial phase is all about assessing where you are now, having a think about that. What is it your organization already does? Doing some sort of needs assessment. So asking staff what it is that they need, or some sort of gap analysis where you can start to ask other people in the organization of what that they're currently doing, what they would like to do. At the start, it might be worth keeping your objectives really high level. For example, you might want to reduce staff turnover. And then as you go through your strategy, maybe whether that's over 2-3 years, reflecting and making them more specific as your strategy progresses. One thing that's really important is to try and make your objectives quantifiable so that you can evaluate whether you have hit your objectives further down the line. So here's some examples. So things like lower sickness absence, we want to have better staff retention, we want to increase morale and engagement, we want lower sickness absence, we want better, as I said, staff retention. Depending on where you are, you might want to start even simpler. So have an objective to put in place a wellbeing committee, an objective around how you will communicate progress to senior leadership. Really does depend on where you are as an organization for your wellbeing journey. When setting your objectives, it's really important, as I've said, to get different stakeholders involved, get thoughts from senior leaders, managers, and staff. Don't just talk to your colleagues in your team. Try and speak to as many different and varied people as possible. Start with achievable steps. Don't go from nothing to absolutely everything overnight. It's very unlikely to be successful. We should aim as an organization to be continuously improving. And this is exactly the same for a wellbeing strategy or program. And importantly, for your objectives for your wellbeing strategy or program, make sure that it fits with the overall goals and priorities of your organization. What's your vision as an organization? What are your priorities? It'll mean that when you come to run your program or interventions or working on your strategy, that it's going to be much more successful because you're not going to be fighting against other priorities and objectives from the rest of the organization, which we know can be quite difficult. As you're going to be starting at quite a high level and want to become more specific, continuous improvement with anything is really important. If you are looking at a 3-year strategy, don't set your objectives and write, okay, I'll see you in 3 years, see how we've got on. Let's have a think about how we can continuously to look throughout the years and, right, has this worked? No, okay, well, let's change it now. There's no point waiting for those years to go and then be like, well, we spent this money, we spent this resource, we spent this time. Actually, we could have known this in the first year that we needed to change it up because actually our staff need this, whereas we thought they needed that. On the screen, there's the World Health Organization. They have a healthy workplace framework and model. And they've mentioned in steps 7 and 8 the importance of evaluating and improving. And there's a lot of information on there, but I'm not going to go through it. I will be sending the slides out afterwards, but essentially it's about assembling your team, evaluating where you are now, setting your vision, your priorities, your objectives in a way that has a wide buy-in and communicating this widely. If you do that, this will then need to cascade down to each team via line managers, and line managers play an absolutely key role in that link between what the organization is planning and what those teams actually see on the ground floor. Thinking about measuring your success with everything as an organization, you want to measure that what you're doing is right. You want to make sure that it's working, it's actually making an impact. There's no point putting stuff in place if you can't at the end of it say, well, this made this impact, this made this impact, and we're seeing a good impact from this, and it means we can keep going with it. Workplace wellbeing outcomes are notoriously challenging to measure, but it is possible. Although many of the benefits of well-being are intangible, so thinking around how it will impact perception by employees or potential candidates, or things that have a long-term benefit, so things like, for example, how nutrition awareness may affect their employees' long-term habits and health outcomes. And therefore, these kind of things don't reflect in traditional return on investment calculations, which is unfortunate because that's quite often what senior leaders want to hear. Although there are, however, plenty of aspects which can be measured and are helpful for gauging progress and allowing you to stay on the right track for your wellbeing strategy. So thinking about what data you currently measure, as well as what is important to your organization. So as an organization, you might measure sickness absence rates already. You might measure productivity, staff turnover. If you're measuring sickness absence, are you just measuring numbers, or would it be more important to have a think about what type of sickness it is, so we can kind of implement those interventions to support that? If you've got a high sickness absence due to menopause, for example, increasing menopause awareness for line managers, so they can get that support there and there, rather than individuals having to go off work. And the same sits for mental health, etc. We can think about how we can measure this. So things like risk assessments, as I've said, there's Public Health England do what we call a workplace health needs assessment, and obviously there are other engagement surveys, etc. So have a think about what it is that you currently measure as an organization and how that can help. The next step, framework. So framework can be a little bit more difficult to get your head around. I know it was for me when I first started working in workplace wellbeing. But the next step is getting a framework in place to give you a structure to your wellbeing strategy and program. And there are many frameworks to choose from. So some frameworks lead to certification. So for example, the ISO 45003 and Investors in People. On screen, you can see a few of them there. So for example, the New Economic Foundation, it's evidence-based framework, which is based on the 5 ways to wellbeing, which you may have heard of before. We've got things like learning, connecting, taking notice, being active, giving, There's so many to choose from. There's other examples like the NHS Wellbeing Framework and the HSE Management Standards, as I've said. If you're at the start of your wellbeing journey as an organisation, the important thing is to choose a framework that works for you. So there's a couple of top tips there, is making sure that they allow for continuous improvement so that you can change things, edit it, tailor the model to your needs as an organisation. As I said, so that it reflects the needs of your staff. It needs to be flexible enough to provide a foundation for an evolving strategy. It needs to be linked to the standards which your strategy could be evaluated against in the future. So for example, if in the future you're wanting to have a think about what the quality of sleep like is amongst your employees, then probably is the New Economics Foundation, which is actually the seven ways. If you look at the bottom left, sleep is included in there. So you might want to have a think about whether that would be a good framework for you. And also be from a reputable source, is widely used and provides resources for your help, because if this isn't something that you're doing on a day-to-day basis, like it is me, it can be quite a minefield. And obviously you've got loads of other work to be getting involved with and the rest of your work. So you want this to be as easy as possible for you, and as impactful as possible. If there's anything that I've said today that I would like you to take away from this, it's this next slide. So once you've decided on a framework or tailored one, as I said, it's time to look at what wellbeing interventions you're going to roll out for your staff. Wellbeing interventions don't have to be what you might think, mindfulness or a stress awareness course or a couch to 5K at lunchtime. Of course, they're really helpful. But thinking about, if we look at the 3 different types of interventions, if we look at the primary interventions, they're the 6 underlying solutions to psychosocial risk factors. So primary interventions look at prevention at source. And if we're looking at prevention, it's going to be much more likely to make a bigger difference, a much more effective difference. So I say psychosocial risk factors, so they're things that may affect workers' psychological response to their work and workplace conditions. So for example, you might want to redesign the rosters for shift workers if you're having a high level of fatigue. They might want to give employees more control over how they manage their own work. They might want to, so you can control their autonomy and control around their work, and maybe increase how much support they are getting. There's a ream of evidence, if you wanted to look a bit more into that, called the job demand resources model. It focuses on, there's 2 types of things that help hinder or help health in the workplace. We've got job demands, so like workload, etc., which increase stress upon an individual. And you've got resources, things like how much they're participating in teamwork, line manager support, fellow team support, and those things, resources, improve or fight against those stress factors. Primary interventions focus on the working environment and you as an organization, thinking about how you can make those changes to prevent ill health in the first place. Looking at secondary interventions, they improve support for individuals around self-care and how to mitigate poor working environment and those psychosocial risks. So you're not changing how work is done, you are looking at how you can help employees to cope better to those exposed psychosocial hazards that we may have mentioned. So things like I've mentioned, mindfulness, personal resilience training, etc. And then we go to tertiary, which stereotypically have been, over the last 15, 20 years, the ones that have been the most common. Support after the fact, restoration and rehabilitation. So things like an employee assistance programs, counselling, health insurance, and to some extent mental health first aid. Tertiary interventions look to support individuals after they've got ill or after they have symptoms of illness, etc. So if you think about that, you're actually only going to be supporting individuals once they get to the point where they might be going off sick. If we look at the 3 primary interventions, are highly effective approaches to addressing barriers to well-being at source, and they can provide simple and low-cost ways to improve well-being. So thinking about how work is done. On to the next bit, well-being calendar. So consistent communication with your staff and keeping their well-being in the forefront of everyone's mind is key to building a culture where well-being is valued and discussed, as it really helps with keeping staff engaged and they begin to see it as a priority of the whole organisation, not just tick box exercises. One way of doing this is by having a calendar of events throughout the year that everyone knows about well in advance, so they can plan their diaries to attend things, etc. It's important to find the right rhythm, keeping your well-being agenda fresh and engaging, but not overwhelming. We want to make sure that people still have time to do their own jobs, but making sure that well-being is at the forefront of their minds, so they can create a buzz. As your program grows and engagement builds, you may look to increase the frequency of things. As I've mentioned before, effective communication is really key. It's a key success factor for your wellbeing strategy, wellbeing program, helping your staff to stay well. And it can often be challenging, as you may find that you're competing with messages from across the your whole organization. So I always say it's good to have a friend in the comms team if you have one, so you can be in line with what they're going to be communicating. There's no point if you're wanting to send out a wellbeing survey if there's already a survey planned, for example. And finally, thinking about your team. If you as an organisation have got one person for leading workplace wellbeing, it's really helpful to have a team of individuals that can support them, whether that's someone in HR, senior leadership, whether that's champions, etc. So creating and implementing a comprehensive wellbeing strategy is a team effort. It's important to draw on support and input from different areas of the organisation for it to be successful. Beyond the core team members whose role it is focusing on wellbeing, you might look to recruit a wider team, as I've said, so that could be senior leaders, line managers, etc. Creating a wellbeing committee with volunteers. Think about how you can get lots of different people and lots of different types of people involved, keeping it varied, different roles, different cultures, etc., so that we're not automatically thinking of coming together and just doing the one thing. Obviously, things like this come as a volunteer role sometimes, so it's really important so that they've got that drive. So you need to make sure that you're recruiting the right people, just making sure that they have the time to do it, and that you've got their line manager sign off, and that you can keep them on board. So things like making sure that you're developing their skills as a champion, just touching base with them, actually using them for feedback on how things are going. Does anything need changing? And also little things like recognizing the input that they're making and rewarding them for their contribution. And that's absolutely everything for me in terms of workplace wellbeing with impact. We've got a couple of links on the slides there. So obviously our website, sipwellness.co.uk, email address and phone number there. As an organisation, we do everything from webinars, 1 hour webinars which are recorded for you, but ran live, and we do on-site body composition testing coming on site to your organisation. A lot of my work is around supporting organisations with wellbeing strategy, etc. And we also have one of our biggest and most popular programs is our Super Champs program, which is a wellbeing champion support program. So monthly CPD accredited webinars, making sure that they're upskilled, etc., to be doing their wellbeing champion program job and volunteer role. It'd be great to connect with us on LinkedIn, and also myself. And if you're big on YouTube, like YouTube, we also have a YouTube channel as well. So do get in touch if you've got any thoughts around workplace wellbeing and just want a quick chat, etc.
Elliot, there's a couple of comments in the
fab.
chat you might want. The second one isn't me, by the way. It's someone pretending to be me.
Okay, so I'm a governor. Thanks for the questions. Let me just review them. Sorry for not getting them to earlier. I'm a governor of 2 schools. We planned a wellbeing strategy and followed a 2-year campaign along the lines you promote. We achieved a wellbeing accreditation through a 2-day audit. Fab, Ian. This includes us having a student wellbeing ambassadors, a wellbeing hub, and menopause Mondays, a monthly meeting to discuss issues. Fab. Yeah, that's really good there, Ian. So a couple of things. Obviously, that wellbeing strategy, and we had that 2-year plan. And those things like wellbeing accreditations, and there are plenty of accreditations and awards out there for organizations as well, not only schools. Things that you can put on recruitment documents to make sure that you are showing up. If you're going to be putting all this work in, you want to show it off as well, so putting it on your socials, recruitment documents, etc. And then from Joe, given the financial pressures the university sector is under, ensuring employees have the necessary tools to manage workload is really key to promoting well-being. Definitely, Joe. So access to training to assist with prioritization, time management, collaboration, and communication with colleagues. This also needs to align with the university's strategic goals. Yeah, for sure, Joe. So I think what you're definitely pointing out there, obviously, what the university is focusing on there is that primary intervention. You're helping individuals manage workload better, how to prioritize tasks and make it less stressful for them, how they can collaborate better and communicate better as well. Because if we support individuals to be able to do their job easier, they're going to be more productive, they're going to be less stressed about it, they're going to enjoy work more, and they're going to stay and everything that comes with it. Thanks for that, Joe. Ooh, good question. Let me have a look, Dominique. Do you have any suggestions as to how to deal with a HR department who believe it's acceptable to have a certain amount of staff off with stress and that it's normal for that to happen? Okay, Dominic, that is a very good question. Let me just have a drink and think about it. I think the question would be is, why do they think it's acceptable? Not from coming across as a judgmental point of view, and how are they measuring it as acceptable? Are they looking at benchmarking somewhere? Obviously, you're not going to be able to support and prevent everyone going off or a certain number with stress, but I think it would be really interesting to see why it is that they believe that number that of kind of sickness absence due to stress that they believe is acceptable, and how are they comparing that? Are they comparing it as a benchmark, or are they just saying, oh, that number looks okay to me? Because I would start to challenge that if it's very much we believe that's okay, so let's just not do anything about it. It would be interesting as well to have a look at the other statistics around staff turnover at your organisation to see whether you could bring that into it, because if they've got a high level of staff stress and that's why they're off, then actually more than likely you're going to have a high staff turnover, and you could always talk about that as an impact in both financial and as how you look as an organisation. It's never good when you've got high staff turnover, because not only is it costly, but also if other people see loads of people leave and they start to think, oh, actually, why is everyone leaving? Maybe I should start to look to leave. So even if they're not leaving due to stress, they might think, oh, maybe I should look elsewhere. Hopefully that helps, Dominic. Have we? Yes.
I was just going to say that I found it interesting just going through this with you today, to make me think that we should, as a department, pay more attention to what the university, obviously I work for the Surrey University, but I don't think I get involved in it enough for my own department, and I think I need to have a look at it and see what we can do specifically for our own staff.
Yeah.
We obviously look at, as I say, how we do the tertiary area that you talked about, but possibly need to get a bit more involved up front, and rather than leaving it to our HR colleagues.
Yeah, for sure. And I think personally, if I was in your HR department and you had some thoughts, I had a colleague coming from elsewhere who wanted to get involved around their department, I'd be more than happy with that. The more help, the better, because you understand your department better than they ever will. They've got an understanding of how the university works as a whole, and that will be the same for most organisations. HR will understand how the organisation works as a whole to a certain level, but if you are in a certain department, you are going to know what your staff need and what the issues are much more than HR will, even if they've got all the best data in the world. So yeah, definitely reaching out and that, etc. Ian's popped in, organisations often do not understand the difference between stress and anxiety. Stress is external pressure. Firms need to understand where those external pressures are coming from exactly. And I think, interestingly, it's not always as easy as you think. So doing those kind of listening events to staff, depending on how many staff you have, those kind of staff surveys, speaking to line managers, different areas of the organisation, not just focusing on one or two that have good engagement with surveys. Really, if I ran a survey and there was a certain couple of areas that were saying, oh, we don't have time to do a survey, that's exactly the people that I'd want to be getting into to trying to speak to, because they're the people that are going to be busier, have a higher workload, more stressed, and those are the people that actually need helping more. So really getting an understanding of what those pressures are coming from the workplace. And of course, not everything is workplace based, but as Joe mentioned at the start, work-life balance. When you leave work, very rarely do you go home. If you go home at all, or if you're even work from home, very rarely do you stop work and not think about work or take any work from work home with you. So it is really important to kind of have that link in between as well. Does anyone get any other questions? Thank you very much. So what I'm just going to do before I hand back over to Joe to finish off, I'm just going to pop a feedback link in the chat box. If you would be so kind to fill that in for me, that would be absolutely amazing. Be as brutally honest as you want. I won't track you down, don't worry. I've been in this role since January with Super Wellness, although I've got a vast amount of experience elsewhere in workplace wellbeing. So I am very open to any feedback that you may have around thoughts around the session, etc. And that's everything from me, Joe.
Oh, thank you very much, Elliot, and thank you all for attending and your questions and comments in the chat. And like I said, if you want to get more involved in IWFM, it'd be lovely to hear from you as well, particularly the South Region. We cover a wide region across the South, sort of up to Guildford, and so you know, we're keen to hear from you as well about what other events we can offer. I think these online ones are probably the way to go for most of the events, and perhaps a Friday lunchtime is quite good as well for people's diaries. So we will be arranging some more and we'll advertise accordingly. But thank you very much. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.